Hello everyone, my name is Joshua and welcome to Northern Solar. In this video we're going to be looking back at December 2023 at our solar installation here in Cheshire, looking at the facts for the generation, the consumption, how much money was saved and all of that to see if we can answer the question, are solar panels worth it? So as usual we've got quite a lot to go through, so I'll jump straight into the presentation. So for those of you that are new to the channel, this is our solar installation. We have 8 kilowatts of solar panels, that's 4 kilowatt on the east at the back of the house and 4 kilowatt on the west at the front of the house. That's connected to a 6 kilowatt SolarEdge inverter and we have 13 kilowatt hours of Growatt battery storage. So as expected, December was pretty terrible. The weather's been up and down, as you can see. We had some half decent days but a lot of bad days and some really terrible days. So yeah, highest right at the beginning of the month, 6.9 kilowatt hours was the highest day we had. The lowest day we had 0.7 kilowatt hours, so that's really not a lot at all. Total for the month of 81.6 kilowatt hours generated at an average of just 2.63. So as expected, December in the UK, pretty poor for solar. So comparing that to the rest of the year and to previous year, we had the solar started in April last year, so we've got 2022 in red and 2023 in blue. So as you can see, the blue lines coming down into winter, December 81.6, comparing that to 87 kilowatt hours that we got last December, which means we're about 6% lower than this month last year. So we've got a full year now of data for 2023 and we had 9 months of data in 2022, so we're starting to get a really good picture of what we should expect each month of the year. And as you can see, December not very low, but as compared to last year, it's kind of what we expected. So let's see what that meant for us in terms of production. We had an average day on the 15th of December. So as you can see, really quite a late start to the day, after 8 o'clock, maybe even 8:30 when the solar first kicks in. Generating around 1 kilowatt for a little while around lunchtime, but as you can see, really not very good. We had worse days than this, we had better days than this, but as you can see, it tails off pretty quickly again, and by just before 4 o'clock, the solar day is over. So not a lot of generation on an average day at all. So how does that translate into our consumption in the house? Even though we don't have a lot of solar, how do we manage our consumption? So obviously this is where the battery comes into play. So as you can see, the green box in the background is the state of charge of the battery, and the other parts of the graph, the red, is what we've imported from the grid. So you can see overnight there's a 3 kilowatt import constantly charging the battery up from around say 10% all the way up to almost full. I think we just kind of run out of time to fill the battery. This is our off-peak window in our tariff where we have cheaper electricity for 4 hours from midnight till 4:30. So this is where we charge the battery up and then take the energy from the grid when it's cheap, and then after 4:30 the house starts to use the battery, so you can see it slowly coming down. So there's very little usage early in the morning, and then as we sort of using more during the day, more things on in the house, computers if we're working from home and such, you can see the battery starting to come down. There was a little bit of solar, which you can see here, this other green bar behind here, it starts to charge the battery again a little bit during the day, but generally it's sort of just covering the load of the house, the solar during the day, and the battery's not really doing an awful lot. What you can see here is a big drop in the battery, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail later, but this is where we've made the most of the saving sessions that have been happening throughout the winter. I don't know if you've seen these advertised anywhere, but Octopus have been doing these as well as other energy providers, but we've been able to make a really good use of our battery during that period. So what happens is essentially we discharge the battery to the grid during this time, so the battery drops down for an hour, exporting at around 2 or 3 kilowatts out to the grid to make the most of the saving session at that point. I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. And then you can see in the evening, the rest of the evening, sort of cooking, general usage in the house, maybe the dishwasher, things like that, all just using the battery into the night, and then obviously very low usage again late in the night there. So yeah, as you can see, obviously there's not a lot of solar impacting the graph at this point. It's mostly the battery doing the lifting in this time of the year, which is really good for us because we are able to charge it very cheaply overnight. So each day we're starting with basically a full battery, and it's lasting us throughout the day, even with this extra exporting that we've been doing on the occasional day. So as I mentioned, we are still using the grid quite a lot at this time of year because there's not enough solar generation to cover the usage of the house. So you can see here our grid import for December from the grid, was 612 kilowatt hours in total. Most of this is during the off-peak window, charging the home battery and also charging our electric vehicle. So you can see some days we're bringing in over 30 kilowatt hours from the grid during that period. And we also exported 41 kilowatt hours back to the grid. So this is an interesting one. You think of it, they're not really generating enough. How we're still exporting energy to the grid. This doesn't seem to make much sense. The times when they have these saving sessions announced, you get extra money to export to the grid in those hours. So we've forced the battery to export out of the battery into the grid. So some of that is covered by that. And other days are when the battery is full in the morning, we don't use too much, and then the sun actually comes out and charges the battery to full, and then we're not using the excess electricity at the time. So some of it does go out to the grid at that point. But the difference between the selling out to the grid at on our tariff and buying in overnight is very minimal, so there's not much difference in either exporting to the grid or buying it in at night, so it kind of nets off a little bit there. So as you can see, most days we've been charging at least sort of between 5 and 10 kilowatt hours, and then quite a lot of days in between. So these are the ones that we're charging the car most likely overnight at home. So we've got an extra sort of 10-15 kilowatt hours going into there to get up to 30 kilowatt hours from the grid. We haven't done an awful amount of miles in December. I'll go into that a bit later on, but again, it's most nights we'll be charging the car a little bit at least. So as you can see, over the year, the grid import drastically changes. So as you can see in the winter months, January, February, March, it's importing quite a lot, and that is obviously charging the cars, but also powering the house by charging the home battery. Once we get into the sort of April time, you can see we're not having to charge the battery very much at all from the grid, if anything. So you can see the grid usage down here is then much lower per month. And again, almost all of this in those times is charging the car, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. And then you see as we approach the autumn and the winter, we start having to rely on the grid in the overnight off-peak period to charge the home battery. Right, so as I mentioned, we have this Octopus Go tariff that we use. We get 8 pence per kilowatt hour to export, and this is our rates. It's split, so we get 4 hours from half past midnight till 4:30 in the morning, which is 9p to buy electricity in from the grid at that point. So if we export during the day, we get 8 pence for that power, and it costs us 9 pence to buy it back at night. So you're only losing 1p per kilowatt hour when you're accidentally exporting if you've got the battery full and the sun does come out. So it's actually not really too detrimental to do it that way. It's better to have a fuller battery in case the weather's terrible, and if the battery runs out, then you're going to be using the grid a lot more, which, as you can see, during the day it's 31.41 pence per kilowatt hour currently for us. So we try and avoid using the grid during the day as much as possible, and I'll show you that detail in a little bit. One thing to note is our standing rate is 60.18 pence per day, which to me is horrendous, but I believe this area that we live in just generally has higher standing charges than others, and it's not much we can do about it, unfortunately. So as I mentioned, the Octoplus saving session. So Octopus announced the Octoplus saving sessions, where you get rewarded with Octo points for every kilowatt hour that you save during certain windows. And they announce these usually the day ahead of time, or sometimes on the day. And what we do is we had 6 sessions during December, and each time there was a session announced, we programmed the battery to export during that time. So last year, you didn't get any extra points for exporting to the grid. It was only calculating on energy you saved. And as we weren't using anything from the grid during the day, we didn't get really any Octo points as a bonus. Because we weren't really saving any, because we weren't using any anyway from the grid, because the battery was powering the house at that point. But this year they've included exports as savings, so it means that for these sessions that we have, for instance, in this one we had 1 hour, so we exported, so on average maybe 3 or 4 kilowatt hours to the grid in those times. So one of them was a bit longer, we had more time to export, we got more points for that one, and the rest of them usually about an hour. Sometimes it's nearly 3. I think one day we had something else running in the house at the same time, a dishwasher or something, so we didn't export quite as much. But as you can see, you get a points tally at the end of each session, and that translates, I think it's 8 points to a penny. So you divide it by 8 and you get your money. So this is money that Octopus then give you as credit on your bill. And as you can see, this month I added £43.46 for 15.9 kilowatt hours, which on average I think works out, as you see, it's not far off £3 a kilowatt hour saved. So it's pretty generous to be able to do this. It really does help, and I'll go into the more financials in a little while, but you can see just how much extra you're able to save, because the solar itself isn't doing an awful lot at this time of year, so you're not able to save an awful lot. But again, these tariffs and these home battery systems that we have are allowing us to save more money on our bills by making the most of these saving sessions as and when they happen. So this graph is the year's comparison for solar generation and how much we consume from the grid and how much the total consumption of the property is. So the green line here shows the solar generation. So as you can see, it's pretty low, going all the way through the year. Summer much higher, starts low in the winter, comes up to the summer and down again in the winter, as you can expect. And then the consumption in the property is much more regular. Generally, our consumption changes very little throughout the year in terms of what the house consumes. As you can see, there's a couple of spikes up and down here. This is mostly due to how much we've had to charge the car. You can see the purple line here is the EV charging. So during the winter, we charged more. In the summer, we've been charging less, and then we charge less. This kind of depends on how many miles we're doing, how much charging we're doing, obviously. What you can see is that the grid consumption is closely matching to the EV charging, which kind of means all of our grid consumption really, especially from the summer, sort of from May all the way through to sort of September, is only to charge the car. The house is completely self-sufficient, and then as you can see, as it starts to get into autumn, winter, and then into spring, you can see the difference here between the EV charging and the grid consumption. So some of this then is going to power the house from the battery. So you've got a little bit of charging here into the home battery, more charging in the home battery, and a lot more charging in the home battery here. The gap between the grid consumption and the EV charging lines is essentially what's being powered into the home battery to charge the battery at home to power the house. And then that obviously feeds the consumption. So the consumption line is made up of the grid and the solar consumed directly from the solar. So as you can see, it does depend on the usage that we're using in the car, which is a bit of a separate subject, but I do touch on it a bit in these videos, because our car, we drive, I don't know, maybe 1,000 miles a month, so we're charging quite a lot. So it does have a big impact on our grid consumption. If we took out the EV charging out of this consumption, you'd see that realistically the house uses very little from the grid. Even in the winter, we don't use a ridiculous amount of electricity in the house, especially when you compare it to the car. You can see the car uses most of what we get from the grid. So, most importantly, financials. Let's go into the details firstly about what the production and consumption was. So for December 2023, our solar production, as mentioned earlier, was 82 kilowatt hours. We exported 41 kilowatt hours of those to the grid, which means we consumed 41 of those kilowatt hours in the house. Our grid consumption, as I mentioned, was 612 kilowatt hours for the month. And this is where the split really becomes a bit more obvious. 595 of those kilowatt hours were during the off-peak period, so charging the car, charging the home battery, and only 18 were during peak hours. So the reason why we had some usage during peak hours is either because we had to maybe charge the car a little bit extra than we could do during the off-peak time, or occasionally if we need more demand in the house, if we've got a lot of things going on at once, maybe the cooking, maybe dishwasher, washing machine and things like that. We try and schedule it so that they're not all on at the same time, and if they can be done overnight, we would do. But occasionally, you're using more in the house than the solar and the batteries are able to provide. So there's usually a little bit in here. So 18 out of the 612. As you can see, the breakdown there shows peak grid usage is only 2.74%. 91.02% of the grid usage was off-peak grid, and then only 6.23% was powered by the solar, which, as you expect in December. It's about a 50-50 split from export from the solar and consumption of the solar, so to be expected really, but I think it's a little bit skewed because we have more exports in this month because of the saving sessions. Normally you'd expect that export to be a lot lower, but we did export purposefully to make the most of those saving sessions. And this is where the financial benefit of that really comes in. So with solar, our standing charge was £18.66, and that would be the same without solar. The cost for all of our grid usage for December was £59.14. We estimate that would have cost £117.34 if we didn't have the solar. So that gives us an electricity cost with solar was £77.80, and an estimated electricity cost without solar would have been £135.99. We earned £3.27 export earnings. That's just on our normal Octopus outgoing 8p per kilowatt hour. Obviously, if you don't have solar, there's no export earnings. The saving sessions earnings was £43.46. Now, I don't know what that would have been without solar. It's really hard to judge it. I talk to people that have taken part in the saving sessions but don't have solar, and it really varies. So I can't really put a number on that. It might be £2, it might be £5, it might be £20. It's really hard, so I haven't bothered putting an assumption in for that. That leads us to a net electricity cost overall of £31.07 for solar and £135.99 for without solar. So a monthly saving, the difference between those two numbers, £104.93. So not too bad considering there wasn't an awful lot of sun. We were able to make the most using our tariffs and using the exports and the saving sessions to try to save over £100 even when there was not a lot of solar generation at all. I did a little extra one this month for the overall cost per kilowatt hour. So if I take the total net electricity cost of £31.07 and divide it into the total consumption of from the property, that includes the house, the car, everything we've used electrically wise, it comes out at 2p per kilowatt hour. So that's quite a good metric. I've not really used it before, but it does kind of show you just how low you can get your cost per kilowatt hour if you have solar system, battery system, and the right tariff to go with it. As mentioned earlier, these graphs just show the split between consumption and export, and then how the consumption is broken down in between peak grid, very low, off-peak grid, the majority of powering the house, and the solar, very small amount as well. So this one is a little bit smaller. I've actually just truncated it to 2023 now. I used to try and squeeze every month that we've had so far into the graph, but it's all getting a bit much. So this is just 2023 as a review. There is a link in the description to this spreadsheet if anyone's interested in looking at how it all works and everything. It might not have all the exact figures that I've put in there, but it's the same mechanisms to show how it works. So this is December's figures in here, which we've just seen, but it kind of shows a comparison across the year. One of the interesting things to see is how it works with the import and export. So, as expected, we have a similar amount of import and export in the winter months like November and December compared to January and February last year. This one is slightly more export because, like I mentioned earlier, with the savings sessions, we took advantage of those by exporting more to the grid. The consumption profile again is very similar. Here we have. This shows the graphs looking very similar to last January, as you'd expect in the winter. When you come through into spring, the solar starts to play more of a part, and then again through the summer months, the solar is providing more than half of the electricity that we need in the house, and the grid again providing much less. And again, a lot of the grid is charging the car. So in this 12 months, 2023 total, our total savings adding up every month we've had so far in 2023. £1,929.38, which is pretty amazing to me, to be honest. Obviously, it's really hard to judge savings because you're not sure what it would have cost you if you didn't have the solar, but we try and make the best estimates we can, and I'll go into that in a little bit on the next slide. Like I mentioned, there's a link in the description to download a copy of this spreadsheet if you're interested, and just follow the link in the description. So the cumulative savings is the last row here, and that adds in the savings from this year onto the savings from the last 9 months of last year, which has just put us over £3,000 or £3,062.74 in total savings so far. Just want to do a quick comparison comparing the numbers and show you what differences your assumptions make when it comes to savings and things. So December 22 compared to December 23. Generation, like we saw earlier, was very similar. Exported to the grid was more. Like I said, we took advantage of the saving sessions, so we exported more. Grid consumption was slightly higher. Again, the peak grid consumption slightly higher again, and the off-peak slightly higher again. Again, it's mostly charging the car and charging the home battery in the off-peak. So in general, total consumption in the property is very similar, usage patterns as last year, so it's to be expected. As we mentioned, export and consumption 50-50 compared to more like 70-30, but again, that's because of the saving sessions exports. These breakdowns again extremely similar as expected, and then we go into the financials. The difference here shows the change from last year, so it's 27% more expensive for the standing charge this year, which I think is terrible really, but there's not much you can do about it. It's kind of one of the things that you can't really get out of. You can't really, no matter which supplier you're going with, the standing charges don't change that much. The cost for the grid usage has gone up. Obviously we did use more from the grid this time, but you can see we used 5% more, but the price went up 25%. So considerably more expensive to buy electricity from the grid this time around. So overall electricity cost did go up. We did actually make about twice as much on the exports earnings because the tariff for export is now twice as generous as it was last year. We had the added bonus of the saving sessions earnings, so overall the net electricity cost for December was half of what it was last year. So really a positive, mainly driven by the saving sessions exports. So huge positives for us in terms of saving even more money. But what's interesting is when you look at the assumed cost without solar, the assumed cost last year was a lot higher. And that's down to a number of things. Trying to assume, sort of decide what you would have used, what it would have cost if you didn't have solar, it's quite difficult. And I've been trying to tailor my assumptions around this to try and make it more accurate, and it's really difficult. And it really depends on what you assume you would have done if you didn't have solar, which is pretty difficult to guess. So yeah, my estimated cost without the solar now is about 30% lower than it was last year. So monthly savings, if you're looking at it in that way, do look lower than last year. But realistically, we paid less for about the same amount of electricity than we did last year. We paid about half as much because of these saving sessions. So really difficult to kind of wrap your head around, but at the same time, it really does depend on how you're assuming what you would have spent. And that goes hand in hand with the next slide, which is the payback calculation. Always a sort of interesting one, and probably the thing that I get asked about most in the comments is about payback calculations. And again, I've tried to be as accurate as possible. I've updated this one again, so there's a link in the description if anyone's interested in having a look at this this calculation, how it all works. So what I did actually this time is I've just taken what I believe to be the measured savings for last year, which was just shy of £1,500 for the first 12 months that we had the system. Which is difficult again to be completely accurate with, but I know that what I spent on our electricity bill in total for those first 12 months was £324, but it's this cost without solar that's really hard to determine. And then going forward, what we've done is I've taken the cost without solar now for the past 12 months, so that was the first whole year from April to April, but the past 12 months from January through to December, we have only spent £108 on electricity. That includes the whole year, charging the car, powering the house with a home battery during the winter. It really has only cost us £108. It's staggering how cheap that is, which means that obviously our savings look higher if we're assuming the same cost without solar. The cost without solar actually brought down a little bit because the tariff price is going to come down. Our tariff price is on a variable rates if you don't have solar, so it's kind of hard to judge what that would be. But I think that as I go, I'll be able to be more accurate with this as we go further on and predict the savings a bit better. But I know this figure of £108 is what I've spent in the last 12 months, so that's kind of what I'm expecting it to be going forward, plus some inflation at around 7%. So the rest of the things in this table are sort of built up of various assumptions in here about what the costs are, what we actually consume within the house for the entire consumption, with it being for the car, both the electric cars, the house and everything, what we consume, how much of that is imported and exported from the grid, and how much comes from solar. It's all kind of built into these calculations. And then I did these financial calculations of rate of return and net present value based on 5% and 10%. And they both look pretty positive to me. Over the 25-year period, it's looking like a really good investment. The payback period looks currently to be around 8 years, maybe just over 7 years, 7.5, something like that, and we'll see us break even, and then after that you're making money every year. So yeah, like I said, links in the description if you want to download that. It's really complicated trying to figure out what the cost would have been without solar, and honestly I don't expect it that I'm getting it 100% right. If anyone's got any suggestions of how to calculate that in a more accurate way than what I'm currently doing in this spreadsheet, I'd love to hear them. It's always gets asked, how much do you save, and it's really, really difficult to answer that question. Going into the car usage, as I mentioned, it's a huge part of our grid usage. The Renault Zoe that we have, we only did 305 miles in December in the Zoe at total charging of 57.3 kilowatt hours. All of that was done at my work, which costs me nothing, which is obviously very lucky to be able to charge at work for free. But that basically meant it was 0p per mile. If you look to previous months, I've done home charging or public charging and have costed those in, but in general it's usually between 0.5 pence and 2 pence per mile, depending on how much public charging we're doing. If we assume I was driving a petrol car at £1.44, which is slightly cheaper than it was last month, 305 miles would cost us just shy of £50, so we've saved that amount by having the electric car in December. Generally, I always say this: the more miles we drive, the more money we save, and you can see that on the next slide with the Volvo. We did 1,277 miles in the Volvo. It's not as efficient. It's a much more heavy-duty car. It's much more comfortable. It has lots of nice gadgets and heated seats and all that sort of thing. So it's a much heavier car, much less efficient with the battery usage. Most of the charging was done at home with this one, 368.8 kilowatt hours at a cost of 9 pence per kilowatt hour, gives us £33.19. Some work charging of 111 kilowatt hours charged at work, which costs nothing. So that means our total overall cost was just 2 pence per mile. So if you look at what would have cost if we did the same amount of miles, 1,277 in a 40 mile per gallon petrol car at £1.44 a litre, that would have cost £208.99. So £175.80 saved in December using the Volvo. Absolutely love this car, by the way. Definitely recommend checking one out if you're looking to get a new electric car. Really, really comfortable, lovely to drive, and very safe apparently with all the gadgets it's got. Little plug for Octopus's Electroverse. They have a network of chargers, and if you're with Octopus you get 5% discount for using them. I've only used it once I think so far, but it worked flawlessly on the InstaVolt charger that I used. The charge goes straight directly onto your Octopus account if you want to, so it's just one bill for your electricity at home and the car charging. If you use the code below, this MazeFrog17007, you'll get a £5 voucher when you charge your car, and I'll also get a £5 voucher for myself as well. And one last plug, as usual, if you watch these videos before and you ever get to this point, you'll know every month I'd like to give a little plug to Octopus. I've been with Octopus for quite a while now, and I'm just always happy to say they're a great company. They have the best tariffs for renewable energy, electric cars, off-peak, exports. Everything just seems to be the best on the market for me. The apps and everything they have just seem to work very well. Customer service is generally pretty good if you can get hold of them. On the phone they're really good. Sometimes it can take a while to come back on emails, but I think that's pretty much the same wherever you go. Yeah, if you are thinking of switching energy tariff provider, I would highly recommend Octopus. If you do switch over, you can use this link. It's also in the description. It will get you £50 credit on your bill, and £50 credit will go onto my bill. Massive thank you to anybody who has used the code. It's really been helpful to us to help pay for the electricity and gas that we've used in the house this year. So again, massive thank you to those of you that have used that link. So that's pretty much it really. It's been an interesting one this month. Like I said, we generated a little bit less, but we managed to halve the cost of our energy usage in the house by having that saving sessions extra income. So yeah, it just goes to show that for us, yes, solar panels are definitely worth it. We're saving money every month, even in the winter. It is really dependent on how you use it, what the setup is in your house, what your consumption patterns are like and how you make the most of the tariffs that are available out there. It's really interesting to look at. Firstly, if you're looking at getting solar, there's plenty of options out there. There's so many good installers. I'm not here to recommend what particular products or what particular installer you take to use to get your installs, but the main thing to consider really is what's your usage like in the house. If you're using a lot of electricity, or could you use more electricity if you were to switch over, say, from a gas boiler or into a heat pump or something like that, or even simple things like hot water tanks instead of combi boilers. If you can change over to using electricity and generate it yourself and store it in a home battery, you're less reliant on the grid, you're less reliant on paying for the grid's prices during peak times. There's a lot of options out there to make the most of what solar and batteries and all of this technology can do for you. It's not super simple to understand. It can get a bit number heavy with all the different specifications and tariffs and times of use and setting it all up. It can be quite fiddly, but when you look at it over the long term, like we've had ours for coming up towards 2 years now, and every single month we're saving money. Yes, we do now use a lot more electricity because we have electricity to spare a lot of the year. We sell it back to the grid. We also buy it in overnight in the winter. We charge the cars. We're a lot more electricity focused now than we were before, so huge benefits to us in terms of saving money and being less reliant on the grid and less exposed to like high energy prices. But that's pretty much it for this month. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I might do another sort of annual roundup of where we're at later this month if I get time. There's quite a lot going on at the moment. But yeah, in general, have to answer the question again, are solar panels worth it? And to us, yes, they are. But that's it. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.